Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello Ranks Squad and welcome to Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. My name is Jack Collins and I'll be your host today. And joining me across the water all the way in San Diego is Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yeah, good. Probably not as good as Chelsea fans are feeling right now, but definitely better than Barcelona fans are feeling right now. So that's good for me.
Yeah, you're middle of the road.
Road. That's fine. I'll take that.
It was a super interesting night of Champions League bits and bobs. I was kind of intrigued by a load of these games. Now, some of them ended up being damp squibs, and we'll get to them towards the end of the programme. And a couple of sort of batterings that weren't necessarily batterings in real time. But the big game was obviously at Stamford Bridge between Chelsea and Barcelona. Chelsea coming off a game at the weekend that put them second in the Premier League table and the closest challengers to Arsenal at the top. Barcelona going within a point of Real Madrid at the top of La Liga with a 4-0 thumping of Athletic Club in that first game back at the Camp Nou. And I was intrigued to see what this looked like because both rotated relatively heavily for the weekend. So when the team sheets dropped, it was intriguing to see Chelsea go back to sort of the three in the midfield with Enzo Fernandez playing as the player furthest forward, Reece James moving from right back into central midfield, Estevão getting the start, Garnacho on the other side, Pedro Neto leading the line, which I thought was very, very interesting. But I mean, a perfect night in so many ways for Chelsea fans. Walk us through it.
Mate, it was one of the easiest wins of the season for them. Barcelona, to be honest, were dire. Very, very confusing when you watch a Barcelona team play like that. Barca in the Champions League now, as we sit here, have 7 points from 5 games in the Champions League. Like, that's pretty wild and not what I was expecting to be sat here talking about. Things probably coulda, woulda been different if they had taken early opportunities that fell their way.
How Ferran doesn't score, I will never know.
Mate, Ferran, this was a night to forget for him for sure. Could have put Barcelona 1-0 up. Sanchez is on the floor. He's going the other way and he's on the floor. And Ferran somehow steers it the wrong side of the post. Unfortunate, maybe. Poor. Definitely, to be honest. At this level, Champions League level, you can't miss those. So that was bad enough. Chelsea started to take control of the game. Enzo had 2 goals ruled out. And at the end of the night, honestly, if it had been 5 or 6-0, it wouldn't have been that surprising. That's how bad things got for Barcelona throughout the course of the night. Cucurella done so much damage to them. I'll talk about him a bit more in a minute, but their undoing started from a corner kick that they play this nice kind of set piece over in the corner and it ends up finding its way across the goal. And between Koundé and the nightmare that was Ferran, they inadvertently just stuck it in their own net as they both got the ball stuck between their feet next to the goal line. And it ended up over the line. And Chelsea were 1-0 up. And then before half-time, Ronaldo Araujo gets his second yellow card and is sent off. The first yellow card he's got for dissent, stupidly. It was a stupid one. He's just literally shouting at the ref, basically. And then he clatters Cucurella and takes him down and he gets his marching orders. They were already struggling at that point, so you knew they had an uphill battle. But yeah, Chelsea steamrolled them, to be honest, in the second half. And Estevão was looking back here on a game that will be probably remembered as one of the markers to his stage at the very, very top of the game that he'll eventually take. We all know what this lad is capable of doing. He's young, he's 18, but he is older than Lamine Yamal. He's 3 months older than Lamine Yamal. So obviously Lamine has he's more established, obviously. He's known worldwide, whereas Estevão is known, especially if you know your football. But on this stage, he's just starting to show people what he can truly do. Obviously, we saw him in the Club World Cup. We're seeing him get into the Brazil squads. And now he's making his mark in the Champions League and the Premier League. And, twinkle toes to get himself into the position that allowed him to slam the ball into the roof of the Barcelona net. Juan Garcia had absolutely no chance. I mean, I wouldn't say he had his best night either, but he won't stop in that one. And yeah, Chelsea fans were just able to enjoy it. They were mocking Lamine Yamal. They were singing about Estevão. And they were kind of rolling the years back, really, because they were so dominant. It's not that often you see Barcelona teams dominated like this. I can't really think of anyone that came out of it with any true credit. Whereas on the Chelsea side of things, everything went more or less perfectly. Obviously, it was helped because in the second half, they were only playing against 10 men. But even when it looked like Liam Delap's goal was ruled out for another offside, that ends up being given. So 73 minutes, Delap celebrating, you're 3-0 up against Barcelona, and you can just enjoy it. How many times can you enjoy a Champions League game against Barcelona? Not very often, sir. But they were definitely able to do that, able to give some run out. Like Tyreek George got a run out after coming on for Estevão, who gets obviously the ovation that he deserves as he comes off. Jamie Gittins ended up coming on for Pedro Neto. A Champong ended up coming on for Reece James. They really were able to make sure that this game went perfectly to plan. And at the end, Enzo Maresca's almost spinning around the pitch in circles of delight, Jack. It was funny. Like he was literally going around everyone, like shaking on the side of the head and then swinging around to the next player and like just had this beaming smile on his face that you don't see that often from Enzo Maresca because he always seems to be concerned about something. But Estevão, he had at the end of the game, obviously he's getting the adulation and he's kind of trying to soak it all in. And all the comparisons, obviously, that would have been made naturally in the build-up to the game with him and Lamine Yamal, similar styles of play, similar age, all the rest of it. And he's just outshone Lamine Yamal. And Rafinha is kind of chatting to him. And they're like face-to-face, really close, and the camera's right in there. And Rafinha's kind of like almost just, obviously we don't know what he's saying, but it's like, man, that was all. It was like he was saying to him, you've come of age, you're awesome. Like all this sort of stuff is what it looks like. And Estevão is kind of just looking at him. He's a kid. You forget Estevão's a kid, right? Yeah. 18 is a kid. And he's like kind of gawping like, yeah, I just play football. And this is what I love about this age and stage of his career because there's no ego about it. There's nothing yet to make him believe he's anything else but a naturally gifted, brilliant, hard-working footballer. And that is where we're at with him. And he doesn't realise that he can basically do whatever he wants in life and no one's going to stop him yet. And we obviously see players as they get through their career and they start to build a circle of people around them who hype them up, build their egos, manage their lives, and you almost lose sight of what you're actually there for.
You lose the childish innocence of just playing football. And look, that's partly the fault of the game as we know it, right? Like,
yeah, sure.
You lose that childish innocence as you go through your career, and he hasn't lost that sparkle yet. Even someone like Lamine Yamal, who is an absolute world beater, right? Like no one is doubting the talent Lamine Yamal has in his hands. But when Barcelona aren't playing well, as they weren't here, right? They look to him. Already at this point in his career, I don't necessarily think Chelsea are there yet with Estevão because of the way he's been managed. And even though he's absolutely unbelievable, it doesn't feel like when Chelsea need a moment, it's like, get the ball to him, get the ball to him, get the ball to him. And I appreciate the fans will want that, but I don't feel like the team are necessarily like, just give it to Estevão on that wing. Whereas I think with Lamine Yamal, we are already past the point where if Barcelona need a spark, if they need something magic, it's like, just give the ball to Lamine as many times as possible and just get him into that area. And that's where you kind of see the difference between them. And that's just experience, right? And like the more that Estevão does things like this, has games like this, the more Chelsea will be like, just get him the ball because he has the ability to make magic happen. But, I think this kind of childish innocent stage, that doesn't feel like it's there yet. So everything he does is kind of tinged with wonder still at this point. And look, Chelsea fans are rightly giddy about this. I got a text from one of my best mates, Max, who's known in this parish as Voice Note Max. He hasn't sent us a voice note today, but he just texted me off the game being like, Estevão, man, he's kind of like Suarez and Neymar put together. He's like the silk of Neymar, the clinicality of Suarez. He reminds me a bit of the United Ronaldo, less flicks, just as sensible, but not as clinical yet. Point being, he's like this perfect blend of all these people, but not quite an exact comparison, and therefore he's slightly unique. And look, I can completely see where he's coming from. Now, obviously, comparisons to names like that are always going to get people giddy. And you always have that excitement around someone who's new and making waves in this kind of way. But I do think that sense of clinicality that surrounds him at the moment, that he will make the right decision, 95% of the time, is actually the thing that makes him similar to Lamine Yamal, in that what we kind of have come to expect from Lamine is that he makes the right decision more often than not. And at the moment, what we're seeing from Estevão, and yes, admittedly, it's a limited sample size, but what we are seeing from him is when these opportunities present themselves, he's tending to make the right move more often than not. And that's easier said than done in a team that, is still very young around him and also isn't quite sure of its own identity yet, I don't think, in the same way that perhaps Barcelona are. And that for me is the thing that definitely stands out with what he's done so far.
Yeah, 100%. What I think's best, mate, from a Chelsea perspective, is that he wasn't man of the match. Marc Cucurella got man of the match and fully deserved. In a controlling perspective, he was great. In an attacking perspective, he was extremely important. And he locked up Lamine Yamal. Quotes from him after the game. He says, Lamine, his left foot is dominant. If I could invite him inside, I know I've got teammates there. I left space on his right side, his worst foot. If he did something on his right foot, I would just have to say, okay, congratulations. Mate, he did a really good job throughout this game, Cucurella. We know that he's already one of the best left-backs in the game, but this was one of those evenings when he really showed it. He's having a really good time with things at the moment, Cucurella.
It'll also help him that obviously he trains with Lamine Yamal at an international level, right? That he knows exactly what he's capable of, and therefore there's no kind of surprises in terms of what he's capable of doing. So you make sure that those double ups, those treble ups are working on him. You make sure that you're showing him down the avenues and corridors. And it's one thing, knowing a player is going to try and cut in on their strong side, right? Like that's one thing. It's another thing training with them over and over again as you build up to international tournaments, and in the heat of battle, you understand what their movements might be in a different way. And look, I think that showed in terms of the way he dealt with him tonight.
Yeah, literally as you're talking, I've just got this thing pop up on my Twitter feed that says it's a missing persons appeal. The name is Lamine Yamal, who was accosted by Marc Cucurella at around 8:01 p.m.
I mean, I think it's maybe 8:00. If it was 8:07, I'd maybe let it slide a little bit more because Lamine Yamal should have an assist because that chance for Ferran Torres.
That's a good point. The tweet needs editing for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely edit the tweet, but apart from that, I completely take it. And look, Cucurella is just a wonderful footballer, right? We've known that for a while now, but the way that he was able to contribute in both an offensive and a defensive sense, I thought that Chelsea were pretty brilliant across the board. I just wanted to touch on the Barcelona element of it quickly before we move on, because actually they started okay in this game, right? But it just felt like as soon as they realized that Chelsea were incredibly well drilled, that the pressing game wasn't going to go away, they sort of wilted under that pressure. And from that moment, there's obviously the disallowed goals, and they're sort of getting away with it a little bit in either side because of the handball and then the offside. Not that either decision were wrong, but because you're just a bit like, okay, right, that's just sort of bounced off someone, or someone's been a little bit slow getting back, or all of those things. The moment that they score the first one, and obviously it's slightly comical in terms of how the ball actually ends up in the back of the net, you need your senior players to be able to step up and calm things down. And instead, what you see is your captain getting booked for dissent, as you spoke about, and then making an absolutely unbelievably rash challenge to get himself sent off. You're looking at the players in this team who, Harleys have been there for a while. Koundé, who is one of those players, He scores an own goal. Eric Garcia playing in midfield and stepping forward into that role as he did often at the weekend. You're looking for him to have a moment. You're looking for Frankie de Jong to maybe put his foot on the ball and start controlling it a little bit more. You're looking for Lewandowski to get the ball and make it stick and bring you up the pitch. None of those things happened. And it was like Barcelona's morale crashed in on themselves. And then from there, the individual mistakes kill them. But it felt like it all came from this kind of complete lack of ability to deal with the fact that Chelsea were better organised and probing in ways that they did not want to play. The game got away from them in that kind of regard.
Well, it came from the front, really, for Barcelona. Like, they didn't press effectively. And we know that Chelsea like to play the ball short. Obviously they'll often do that thing straight from the goalkeeper and the centre backs, and they keep the ball in those tight little spaces. It doesn't always go very well. But it's obviously something that they keep working towards, and they will play in tight spaces. And they would often do that with three players in this game. And Barca weren't very good at stopping them from getting out of there. So quite often Chelsea looked like they had an extra man in midfield straight away, which Barcelona couldn't really combat. And then obviously, because Chelsea were gaining confidence in the forward positions, Barcelona just became more and more back-footed. More than that, what you're always going to get from this Chelsea team is a level of competitiveness and physicality that Barcelona didn't even come close to matching. And when they did, obviously they're getting red cards, they're clattering people, or they're doing it because they're getting frustrated. And they just didn't manage this game or this occasion very well at all. And they've really got to get on top of that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. A brilliant night for Chelsea. The Bridge absolutely bouncing after this one. And who can blame them? Because it was a very, very special evening. And I'm pretty sure one that will go down for a long time in Chelsea circles as well. Let's come on to another result that would have taken a few people, I think, by surprise. Manchester City 0, Bayer Leverkusen 2 at the Etihad. And Dean, this is a scoreline that will raise eyebrows. Manchester City made 10 changes for this game. And, you can ask the question, is that squad rotation or overconfidence? And the last time we were on here, I criticised Enzo Maresca for making so many changes ahead of Chelsea's game away at Karabakh and saying that he'd underestimated the opposition and it was almost disrespectful in terms of the amount of changes that have been made and that Chelsea were duly punished. And what has happened here is something very, very similar to Manchester City. Now, if this comes off, you look like a genius, right? You look like a genius. You rotate the side. And I was looking at it and being like, wow, okay, so maybe City have a massive game at the weekend. And I looked at it and they're playing Leeds. And so I think when you kind of look at that element of it, and I know that obviously they lost to Newcastle United in a very kind of energetic and intense game at the weekend. But 10 changes felt like way too much. Now, part of that is obviously Pep being like, I need certain players to stand up and show me that they are capable of stepping into the first team. Someone like an Omar Marmoush, who had such an effect last season, has been limited in terms of his game time this season, both from the fact that he's picked up some injuries, but also the flip side of that Erling Haaland has been so good and there's not really another space in that team at the moment for Omar Marmoush to occupy in the same kind of way. And look, there was the flip side, I suppose, of the 10 changes. I looked at the bench and went, that might be the most unbelievable bench I've ever seen in world football ever, because of the sheer amount of talent that Manchester City had on their bench. So it was Erling Haaland, Ryan Cherki, Jeremy Doku, Nico O'Reilly, Phil Foden, Ruben Dias, Bernardo Silva, Josko Gvardiol, Gianluigi Donnarumma, Mateus Nunes, and the polar bear in Arkansas, Marcus Bettinelli. But you kind of look at it and think, okay, well, if it doesn't work out for them in the first half, then they'll be able to change tack. And they tried that. They made 3 changes at halftime. Foden came on at halftime. Nico O'Reilly came on at halftime. Jeremy Doku came on at halftime. And then a little bit after that, Ryan Cherki and Erling Haaland entered the fray. But it felt like it was almost too little, too late at that challenge. And it's a really well-worked opener from Leverkusen, right? Grimaldo finishes it off. Malik Tillman, brilliant in the build-up, wriggles the space in the middle, releases Ibrahim Maza, who was brilliant all night, down the right-hand side. He whips the ball in. Christian Kafane tees up his skipper to rival home. And to be honest, I think it was no more from where I was looking than Leverkusen deserves. They had a really good shape. They were really well drilled. They were committed from a defensive perspective, industrious industrious in the midfield and able to kind of spring these counters on City that open them up time and time again. And Reinders had a big opportunity just before the break. He was denied by a good stop from Mark Flecken through a crowded box. He maybe should do a little bit better with it. And I kind of was looking at it at half time. The note I made was first half couldn't have gone much better for Kasper Hjulmand and Leverkusen. They were really compact from a defensive shape, and the way that the midfield shielded, Mazza, as I say, unbelievable next to Alex Garcia getting forward. They were adventurous in terms of getting players forward down the wings, especially with the two wing backs when they were going forward, and deservedly rewarded with the goal. That triple change comes from City at half-time, Foden, Doku and O'Reilly for Lewis, Bob and Ait-Nouri. But it didn't stem the tide as Pep would have wanted. Leverkusen doubled their advantages through Patrick Schick, a really lovely header from him. But again, it's Malik Tillman getting way too much time in the centre of the pitch. He produces this cross-field switch that sends Grimaldo scampering down the left. He just about keeps the ball in play, lays it off to Mazza, and he whips in a ball for Schick to glance home. Glorious movement, by the way. Like, he's behind Nathan Ake on his shoulder, and just as the ball comes in, sort of weaves his way around him and flicks it into the corner. Really, really good stuff. Haaland comes on, tries to affect the game. He did race clear once, but smothered by Flecken, and who also made a good stop from a Shirky free kick. But I thought it was really interesting to see how it played out, because Leverkusen looked so sharp on the break as City pushed, and it felt to me equally likely that they were going to grab a third as much as City were pushing for one back. Anyway, it finished 2-0, but I did think it was really interesting that amount of changes. And look, you can talk about the quality of the players who have come in all you like. And I totally understand that players like John Stones, Nathan Ake, Ait-Nouri, who they signed in the summer, Reinders, Nico Gonzalez was the only player who remained on the pitch from the weekend. Rico Lewis playing in midfield, Oscar Bob, Savio, Marmouche. You could talk about all those players as individual talents. But if you completely change the team, you are dealing with the structures of it. And suddenly, from a position where after the win against Liverpool, we were talking about City as potential favourites to not just, challenge for the Premier League title and be that biggest competitor to Arsenal, who are, away at top of the table, but also potentially in the Champions League, that they'd be able to swat teams aside. They've suddenly lost 2 in a row, and you're looking at them and saying, are City on another wobble? And that is the strange thing about, I think, these moments and this amount of changes, considering it's not a top-of-the-table clash at the weekend. That, it's a game that you would expect City to win quite comfortably.
I'm going to defend them a bit, because I think that there aren't that many chances coming up to use the squad. And I think Leeds Leeds is more important than this game. Leeds is more important because they have to stay in the top 4. The way that this season is going in the Premier League, it's going to be, they can't really drop many more points in the Premier League. And they've seen how many upsets there have been this season. So he's got to put out his strongest team against Leeds to make sure that they win that game. It doesn't matter if they lose to Bayer Leverkusen, say. Obviously, he didn't aim to lose the game, but they're going to qualify for the next phase of the Champions League. They've got 10 points after 5 games. When you look at the team, the way that the league's working out right now, they've got Real Madrid to play, but they've also got Bodø, Glimt and Galatasaray. They're going to get enough points to make it through to the next stage. They don't know if they're going to have enough points at the moment to stay on track for the top 4 of the Premier League. Their next 3 games domestically are Leeds at home, Fulham away, Sunderland at home. Those are extremely important matches. And yes, the opposition doesn't sound very glamorous or difficult, but this season, it doesn't really mean anything. None of it means anything. You just look at the league table now and see the results every week. Every week there's weird results. And they're trying to avoid being caught up in that. Now, I don't think it really matters that they've lost 2 in succession here, because the 2 lineups were so different. I've only seen the brief highlights, but there were still opportunities. Even when Haaland came on for the last half hour, like he had 2 or 3 opportunities to actually get him back into the game. And unlike him, was off target and his radar was not on. But so why it's a disappointing one? Pep would have learned something tonight, because he had to test out those players that are knocking on his door, asking when they're getting their chance in the team and wondering how they're going to fit in. And some obviously working their way back to fitness as well, wondering where they're at. So now if James Trafford comes and says, well, why aren't I getting any Premier League games? It'd just be like, look, get out of my office. Yeah, I'll sort you out in January. I'll speak to you in January, mate. It'll be probably to say goodbye. I'm being a bit harsh there. I'm being a bit harsh, but you know what I mean. Like he's got to like set this, because he hasn't really been doing Pep roulette much this season. He hasn't really been. He's been trying to find a more settled side. And recently that's been more difficult because he's got more players available to him that are actually expecting to play. So against Leeds at the weekend...
Could you not made 5 changes and then 5 changes again in the next game? Like,
no, because we don't know where they're all at. We don't know where all these players are at in there.
I can't criticize Maresca last time out for making those changes against Karabakh and saying he was disrespecting the opposition, and then not criticize Pep for doing exactly the same thing here. This is a Leverkusen side who are a very different opposition.
It's great. The team he's put out should definitely be capable of going up against them. But he's learned that. So he's played like the risks, like James Trafford. If he's not going to play in this one, he's never going to play again. So he's got to play him. And this is kind of the thing when he came in. Nathan Ake, he doesn't get many games these days, but he's got to play him again occasionally. So this was a test for him. Aït-Nouré obviously working his way back. Kushinov needs opportunities. Rico Lewis, people have crowed about. Nico Gonzalez has to play in midfield at times. Oscar Bob is actually one of his best players sometimes, and he started. Savinho has to play games. Marmoush has barely got a look in this season, but has to play games. I don't know what really he can do, because Phil Foden had to. I was surprised Phil Foden even came on, because he needed a rest. Phil Foden definitely needed a rest.
But he come on because they were losing.
Yeah, but at that point, I would have been tempted to just leave him out for the duration, because Phil Foden I'd be like, right, you're in for the next 3. I don't care if you don't play today. We'll find another way back into this game. Anyway, my ultimate feeling is that he feels it's more important that he's got Doku, Foden, Haaland, Shirky, Bernardo, whatever, Gvardiol available to him for these 3 upcoming Premier League games, and then Real Madrid. Because Real Madrid, you could be like, well, it's better to lose 2-0 to Real Madrid than it is to lose to Bayer Leverkusen. But there's pride, there's ego, it's a high stakes game. Those are the sort of games where your players believe they should be on the same level. They'll dismiss this one. They'll be like, we don't lose. We're not worse than Bayer Leverkusen. But you want to be on a par with Real Madrid. So look, we all look at it different ways, and I just think that this doesn't really matter because of the points that Man City already had in the bag from the 4 games coming into it.
All I would say on that is that last year, Man City dropped into the playoff round, right? Well, they clawed their way into the playoff round as opposed to dropping into it. And Pep has talked about wanting to get into the top 8. So 1, he has 2 less games, and 2, so they avoid what happened last year was they accidentally came up against Real Madrid in the round of 32, and they were dumped out of the Champions League. You have to be aware that there is not only the extra games on that, but the way that the competition works in this new format is that it's a little bit luck of the draw who you might end up being paired with, especially if there are teams in that conversation who haven't performed perhaps to the level that they might be performing in February or March, and have had a little bit of a ropey start or a rough ride to the season. And then they're coming into this from a different perspective. I feel like, considering where Bayer Leverkusen have been, and look, they were brilliant tonight, right? They deserve all credit. And Kasper Hjulmand has done an absolutely sensational job turning around this team from where they were when Erik ten Hag left, then the mess that they felt the club were in, to take them to 3rd in the Bundesliga. Brilliant win over Wolfsburg at the weekend. And then they go here, and there's a real belief that they'll have it. When they see that lineup coming up against them, they're like, all right, they've made 10 changes. That's what they think of us. That's what they think of us. They can make 10 changes and they'll beat us. That's, red rag to a bull in many ways from a team who were, amongst the elite of Europe not that long ago. Yes, there have been many changes. Yes, there are new blood in there. And yes, obviously it's quite a young team. But they were looked at that as a huge, huge opportunity. City are a team who will have a target on their back. And Leverkusen went in there and they executed their game plan perfectly. And ultimately they come away with 3 really good points.
Yeah, but he's also got to make sure he's in the Champions League next season. And at this stage, he doesn't actually genuinely know whether his team have got what it takes to make sure that they are in that conversation. They've got, at the moment, a 4-point bumper over teams like Tottenham and Man United and Liverpool, who are currently well outside of the top 4 or 5, but aiming to obviously get in there and will close that gap. And he has an opportunity, because of the level of the fixtures that they've got over the next 3, to get 9 points out of 9 and make sure that gap at least remains and possibly builds. So I personally just think that Pep's prioritising the fixtures at the moment.
Okay, fair enough. Well, two different viewpoints on that one at the very least. Right, we'll take a break there. When we come back afterwards, we're talking about Newcastle's trip to Marseille and a cracker in the Arctic Circle between Bodø, Glimt and Juventus. Make sure you stick with us here on Champions League Takeaway on Ranks FC. Welcome back to Ranks AFC and Champions League Takeaway. Jack Collins and Dean Jones with you. And we're going to France, Dean, to the Velodrome, where Newcastle United walked into a vociferous atmosphere from Olympique Marseille. What did you make of this one?
You know, it's one of my worst places in Europe personally to go to and watch football because it scares me. And I think Newcastle fans might now know how I feel. It's an intimidating place inside and out. Don't get me wrong, there's a lovely port that you can go to and stay near and have a lovely drink in the daytime. Once you get near,
real traveller's dream these days, Marseille.
Yeah, but once you get near that stadium, mate, that's always all out the window. You're very scared. And for the first 45 minutes, Newcastle weren't scared. They were winning the game. Harvey Barnes gave him a dream start, really, by scoring within 6 minutes. It was a nice finish, nicely worked. They all combined very well. Voltemade was on the bench for this one, by the way. So, they were looking good.
Lovely from Tonali, I thought, in the build-up to the goal.
Yeah, they never really... they didn't push on from that moment enough. Like, they were dominant across the first half, but as we got closer to half time and Aubameyang was started to get a sniff of chances, you were starting to see glimmers of what would eventually come. And so it turned out to be their undoing had been kind of foreseen, but oh mate, it was a bad start to the second half. And Aubameyang, full credit to him. He races onto this ball, he takes it very wide. It's quite funny because I was actually watching the Chelsea game at that moment in the lounge, and Dylan was in like the office area, and he had this game on while he was on his iPad, and he just shouted out, "Dad, they've just scored an astonishing goal." I don't think he's ever used that word in his life. He must have heard it. Like the commentator must have used that word.
Listening to Ranks FC, listening to me talk about random players. Astonishing.
It might be. But anyway, yeah, Aubameyang's taken the ball wide of the penalty box on the angle, and he's managed to skew it in like Mark Hughes once did, and for Man United in a Cup Winners' Cup final against Barcelona in Rotterdam. It's a really hard angle to score from, but he's managed it to perfection. He's celebrated with a front flip, which Dylan also loved. You were like, oh, that was tasty. We've got a game in our hands here. And then Aubameyang's at it again. He does it again, like another lovely goal. This time, Timothy Weir kind of makes fun of Tino Livramento. Like Livramento, obviously a player that's coveted by players like Man City that we just spoke about in the first part. Also, Newcastle looking to tie him down to a new contract. He's going to have decisions to make and stuff like that. I don't know what he was thinking about in this moment because he didn't seem to be paying enough attention to what Timothy Weir was going to do to get the ball past him. Weir does really well. Picks out Aubameyang at the near post, and Aubameyang does so well to nip in front of Schär and just get the deftest of touches on it to steer it in. It was great stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about the movement, Patrick Schick in front of Arke for Leverkusen second. This was quite similar, although not a headed goal. The ball's on the deck, but very similar in terms of the late movement to get in front of Fabian Schär, I thought.
Yeah, I don't love Aubameyang personally. I think, in fact, Marseille might have the most unlikable strike force from my perspective in Europe between Aubameyang and Greenwood. Definitely not people I'd necessarily want to go for a beer with. But I tell you what, like those two caused Newcastle so many problems. Like Greenwood, he did play well, mate. Like Greenwood, his movements and stuff. If only other clubs could genuinely consider more seriously the idea of signing this guy. Like it does crop up every now and then. You'll see rumours that so-and-so are considering bringing Mason Greenwood back to English football or something. I personally can't see it happening, but I don't watch him that often anymore.
Nor should I see it happen, if I'm being honest.
No. I don't think it will. But he's a really good footballer. Like, he is a very good footballer. And Newcastle, found it very difficult to get to grips with him. Roberto De Zerbi was really enjoying the movements of his side. By the time they were 2 up, he was dancing down the touchline. He was very much enjoying the moment, and Newcastle just weren't able to force their way back into it in the end. As you say, the stadium was absolutely jumping. Quite literally looked like it was rocking from some of the camera angles at times. It was an open game, don't get me wrong. There were opportunities there to go and get it. And as the game wore on, like Newcastle worked to see ways to get back into the game. And while Voltemade obviously was on the bench, they did bring him into the game along with Jacob Ramsey for the last 20-odd minutes to see if they could force an opening. Elanga came on as well. Elanga came reasonably close at one stage to getting him back on level terms. But it was not to be for Newcastle. And so they're kind of back to the drawing board here because they're having a bit of a turbulent season, aren't they? It's up one week, down the next. So you're losing to Brentford, you're beating Man City, and then you're losing at Marseille. So let's see what they get from when they go to Everton at the weekend.
I mean, the form would suggest they will lose because it's been their travels that have really ailed Newcastle over the course of this season, right? Like their one win on the road in the Champions League was Union Saint-Gilloise, which looks like a better result every time you kind of look at it. And when you're seeing some of the things that the USG are picking up, but still... Like it just feels like their travails on the road have been really strange. They haven't got the same kind of juice. And look, Eddie Howe tried to rectify that today, right? Playing Anthony Gordon through the middle. Voltemade hasn't been as effective on his travels as he has been at St James's Park. And actually Newcastle have struggled to adapt to the style, I think, when they've been away from home that the Voltemade is trying to bring. Whereas today they went for sort of a 5 at the back kind of formation with Jacob Murphy playing as a right wing back, Livramento playing effectively as a left wing back, and then a kind of 2 up top with Barnes and Gordon in those areas. It worked to begin with, and then Marseille worked it out. And from there on, it felt like Newcastle had no real ideas apart from try and get the ball into the box late on for one of Dan Burn or Voltemade to attack. And as soon as Marseille sort of figured the game plan out, it felt like Newcastle had no way to shift it and to change it. So, look, we'll obviously see what happens at the weekend. And this is not critical for Newcastle United in terms of the fact that they have won, a couple of games in a row in the Champions League means that they'll probably be all right. But equally, that away form has to change if they're going to challenge across multiple fronts this season because it's not been good enough away from home.
Yeah, no, you are right. It is often they're on their travels that they've got problems. And funny enough, they've got Bayer Leverkusen away next in the Champions League. So let's see how they get on against the lads that have just seen off Man City.
Yeah, well, Newcastle can point to that and say, "Well, we beat Man City too, lads. You're all right." So, so that'll be a fun one. We'll have a look at that. Right, I want to take us quickly to my favourite game of the night, which took place in the Arctic Circle in Bodø, where Bodø Glimt lost 3-2 to Juventus in an absolutely chaotic encounter on the artificial turf, as so many people point out. They had to scrape the snow off it before the game kicked off. Dean had to pump hot air into the stadium to try and clear it, which seemed to offset Juventus in the first half. I mean, look, they made a heap of changes for this one. Adzic started, Chico Conceição started, Openda started as the number 9, Moretti played in the midfield, and Weston McKennie moved to right wing back after playing as a number 10 at the weekend. His versatility continues to be slightly awe-inspiring in so many ways. And Juve conceded relatively early. Blomberg goal. They're really struggling to defend set pieces at the moment, and this was way too easy. A flick on from Berg, finished at the back stick by Blomberg. Just really, really simple. And you're looking at it and saying, is this where Juventus are going to be? My favourite moment of the night came via the commentary here. I was watching Matt Smith on the Goals Show, and he just had a panic moment, Dean, in terms of where he was trying to explain it. It was like, let's go to Bodø Glimt. I mean, here's Bodø, or should I say Glimt? Bodø Glimt in Glimt. And I was like, Matt, you've just got all of the things wrong. Like Glimt, you can say Glimt or Bodø, it doesn't really matter. But Glimt means lightning. Like, it's definitely not in Glimt. It's in Bodø. That's the only thing you need to remember. But just one of those ones where the words just wouldn't come out in the right way. So shout out to Matt Smith covering a lot of ground on that show. And look, in the first half, it felt a lot like Juve's only real threat came on the counter, even if Chico Conceição should perhaps have done a little bit better with a couple of late chances in the first half. And at half-time, Kenan Yıldız came on and he replaced Adzic, trying to get Juve more on the front foot. They were really lacking, I thought, in terms of creativity in the first period. And that is exactly what happened. Yıldız absolutely imperative in the build-up for the equaliser. A host of little 1-2s for his shot fell to Openda to fire home his first goal for Juventus. And look, just minutes later, he was at it again. This sadly wouldn't count, but it was a beautiful, beautiful goal. Openda racing away. Sadly, he couldn't hold his run and he was offside, but they didn't know that at the time. He crossed for Yıldız and Yıldız had the goal gaping. Instead of just like firing at a goal and the keeper kind of scrambling across, this one-touch cushioned little layoff back from Moretti, who just starts it home. And it's one of those where he's not even looking at it. And you're just thinking, this kid's really, really quite special. Like, absolutely unbelievable. And Moretti finished it off, but obviously the offside, and it pulled it back. Didn't stop Yıldız. Didn't care. Off the left wing, dancing through three players. He then slips in Moretti again. He pitches one up and Weston McKennie pops up at the back stick to head home his first goal for Juventus after 6 months. And there was nothing wrong with that one. And Juve really in the ascendancy at this point. Chico forcing a good stop from the keeper after a lovely crossfield pass left him one-on-one with a defender who he sort of shifted up and fired it a goal. Juve trying to turn the screw. But you always felt like without that third goal, they were vulnerable to the sucker punch. And it came via the penalty spot after what can only be described as cataclysmic defending from Juan Cabal. Like, Glimt were moving the ball around the box, but not with any real purpose or not looking like they were actually going to force an opening. And Cabal just goes flying in with studs raised, leaves a late one on the Bodø Glimt player, and ref points to the spot. And you're like, what are you doing? Now, it's lovely to shift the ball away and actually end up drawing the foul, but there is no need to be like rashly flying in for a challenge at that moment. The penalty is well converted by Sandra Fetton. Suddenly, the place is bouncing again, and Glimt go searching for the winner. But again, Yıldız comes up with some magic. He takes the ball down beautifully on the left-hand side. He looks like he's got Velcro on his feet at some points, Yıldız. He weaves into a shooting position. It's deflected and saved by the keeper, but Jonathan David, on as a substitute, pops up to poke it home. A huge goal for him, I think, personally, and for Juventus. Yeah. But ultimately, this was about Yıldız. Absolutely outstanding second half from the young Turkishman. And the reason that Juve came out of this with all 3 points and with their heads held high after what has been a difficult period for them. It hasn't all kind of clicked into place under Spalletti, but they are just so much better when he is on the pitch. Just a glorious, glorious footballer. And there'll be more on Kenan Yıldız on the podcast feed this week. They're talking about him on The Truth on Friday, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But absolutely.
Is it The Truth as to whether he's staying at Juventus or going somewhere else?
I was just talking about next generation of superstar midfielders, but he gets a fair bit of airtime, Kenan Yıldız, and rightly so after a performance like this.
Yeah, it's great to watch, and there are definitely clubs in England, big clubs in England, like waiting to see whether he becomes available. I don't think he will. I think
honestly, I think if he didn't think that Del Piero was like God's gift to mankind, he would have already left Juventus. But
yeah, I just don't think he's leaving. Like, he wants to be there. They're getting there. They've just obviously got a new boss. Then they're going to get the sporting director settled down. And I fully expect that Yıldız will end up signing a new contract at Juve. And to be honest, I hope so. Like, well, I'd one day love to see him in the Premier League. I don't really want it to be now. I'm quite happy for him to continue where he is. I think probably there needs to be some convincing done about where this club is going, because they've been all over the place in recent years in terms of philosophies and results and what their ambitions are and whether they're actually going to meet them, etc., etc. So I think they do have to convince him totally of the club. But I generally, like, he wants to be there, so it's not good. Shouldn't take too much.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, just like from today's showing, Juventus is just so much better when he is on the pitch. And when him and Conceição are clicking together in those roles on the wings, they look very, very special. I still think his best position is a number 10, but some of the stuff he did on the left wing today was absolutely outstanding. So yeah, shouts out to Kenan Yıldız. The only reason that Juventus came out of the Arctic Circle with all 3 points, and their hopes in this competition a little bit more alive than they were when they went into this one. Right, we're going to take a little break there, and when we come back, going to round up all the rest of the action from Tuesday's Champions League. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to the final part of Ranks FC and the Champions League takeaway. And this is the part where we all sit quietly and Jack tells us everything else we need to know about Tuesday's action.
Okie dokie. Let's run through the rest of it. We'll start in Naples. Napoli 2, Karabag 0. On the anniversary, Dean, of Diego Maradona's death, this felt like a really big moment in Naples after some real recent frustration in the competition. Obviously, 2 weeks ago, they lost 6-2 in that bizarre game against PSV. And to be honest, at the start, it looked like they could be on for another upset here. Karabag started this game really, really well. A couple of efforts sort of flashed wide of goal, and they've been, a real force in this competition thus far. So anyone still underestimating them, I think, is on a bit of a fool's errand. But Napoli did grow into it as the first half progressed. And what's been really interesting in recent weeks, you go back to that PSV game, and both Noah Lang and David Neres gave interviews afterwards. Noah Lang basically saying that Conte never speaks to him and that he was deeply unhappy with the situation. And David Neres being like, I really like Amsterdam. I'm not sure about Naples yet, which was, pretty weird and pretty damning. But in the last couple of games, they've started to combine really well. At the weekends, they both were on the score sheet. And then they're very, very nearly again here. A lovely Lang cross was met by an incredible bicycle kick from David Neres. And it was well saved by Kachalski in goal for Karabag. More on him in a bit. There was another moment for Napoli. Di Lorenzo went clean through, but he caught his studs in the turf as he was about to shoot. And it was a very frustrating one that he couldn't finish it off. Ball ending up being blocked and out for a corner. But I think he would have very much looked for that moment. And in the second half, more Napoli pressure. They won a penalty through Di Lorenzo. It was a little bit soft, but an incredible stop from Kachalski to deny Rasmus Højlund from the spot. He fires it towards the top corner. It's just a really, really good save. Quite similar to his penalty against Scotland, but in the other corner. But just an absolutely unbelievable stop. But finally, Napoli found the breakthrough a couple of minutes later, and it eased so much of the tension that was really growing around the stadium. And it was the bottle opener striking again. McTominay forcing home a close-range header after a corner that was sort of pinballing around the box. A defender hit it back. Another good reflex save from the keeper, but McTominay on hand to nod it home. And look, Kachalski in goal for Karabag did not deserve to be on the losing side here. Made a stunning double save moments afterwards, including tipping a McTominay strike round the corner that looked like it was destined for the top bin. David Neres then hit the bar with a sort of cross-come shot after he ran clear, but helped make the second a couple of minutes after that. This time he crossed it behind everyone, and as it was recycled, McTominay tried another bicycle kick, which was going wide until it came off Jankovic, wrong-footed the keeper and sort of dribbled into the other corner to make it 2. So not the most cohesive, not the most convincing display from Napoli that you've ever seen, but I thought they took control of the game really well after about the 25th minute mark and were deserved victors in this one. So it will be a little bit of an ailing to some of the travails have hurt them in recent times in the competition, but a good win for Napoli. A good win too for Borussia Dortmund. They won 4-0 against Villarreal. Dean, this is the 4th time already this season that Dortmund have scored 4 in a Champions League game. They've played 5.
Yeah, true.
Played 5. Yeah. They've scored 4 times. Yeah. Manchester City, the only team to deny Dortmund scoring 4 goals in a Champions League. And Super League, they've gone 4th in the table after this win. Look, an all-yellow affair at the Westfalenstadion, which I was quite excited about. And it really opened with things going the way of the team who were playing in white in Villarreal. Much the better side, I thought, in the first half, even with less of the ball, causing major problems with set pieces, a really well-timed and aggressive press. Dortmund just a little bit vulnerable, I think, generally at the moment. They haven't lost loads of games, but the fluidity from earlier in the season seems to have vanished a little bit. And they're finding a way, though. And on the cusp of half-time, Serge Girassi comes up big, a little header from the second phase of a set piece, sort of flicking it into the back of the net. Question of a handball in the build-up, I will say, from Valdemar Anton, as he stooped to try and control it, but VAR decided it was fine after a long check. And after the break, things just sort of unraveled for Villarreal, which kind of feels like the story of their season in Europe in so many ways. Adeyemi following up, denied by a goal line block from Juan Foyth, determined to be a handball. So not only was the penalty given, his hands by his side, but he kind of moves his body into the way of it. A little bit like I think it's the James Tarkowski one earlier in the season from Everton against Leeds, but a little bit more handy, I think, in terms of the way that it actually strikes him. So he was sent off, penalty given. Girassi actually missed the penalty. So a really poor dribbler down the middle, blocked by the feet of Luis Jr. in goal for Villarreal, but the ball just rebounded back to him and he had all the time in the world to control it and just slot it into the other corner. And to be honest, from that moment, it felt like it was all Borussia Dortmund. They pushed home the man advantage quite quickly after that. Adeyemi getting in behind the defensive line. And I was going to say slightly fortuitously, but like incredibly fortuitously, lifting the ball over. The defender kicks it against his leg and it bounces over the keeper off the back of that. That made it 3-0. He celebrated like he'd scored a 30-yard screamer, which I very much enjoyed. The audacity when he really didn't know all that much about the goal. Dortmund, or a lovely flick though from Julian Brandt through on this one. Really, really kind of sumptuous stuff. Dortmund then given another penalty after Adeyemi was hauled down, but Fabio Silva smashed it against the bar after coming on as a substitute. It looked like it was going to peter out and end 3-0, but Dortmund scored a lovely fourth right at the death. Brilliant cross from Pascal Gross, absolutely begging to be headed home, and it was done so by Daniel Svensson. I would say the scoreline flatters Dortmund a little bit, but it probably doesn't, considering they missed a penalty in all of this. And actually, once they went 2 up and a man up, it felt like they were in complete control. But the first half was very much Villarreal's, and they didn't take advantage of their chances. They were done on the cusp of the break by a bit of a sucker punch, and they never really recovered from that. But equally, I didn't think this was one of those games that Borussia Dortmund can look at and be like, yeah, we walloped them, because that wasn't really how it went when it was with 11v11.
Yes, mate, they wallop everyone. You just said that at the start. Like,
no, they score 4 a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean they're walloping teams. It's one of those a 4-4 draw against Juventus.
Wow, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, on this one, it looks, you look on paper and you see 4-0 over Villarreal and you're like, whoa, what an outcome. What an outcome. And then when you look at the goal scorers as well, you're just like, oh, they've absolutely smashed it. So that's all that really matters, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. The wins are stacking up in many ways. They're not stacking up for Ajax, who lost 2-0 to Benfica. And
Ajax are dying, aren't they?
Yeah, it's really bad. Diax, more like. Am I right?
Yeah.
But Benfica haven't been brilliant either in recent times, but they got on their way here. Early goal from Samuel Dahl, the fullback, and a second on the stroke of full time from Leandro Pereira. Great goal, by the way. But there's a first win for Benfica in the Champions League this season. And the two of them were kind of propping up the table, right? Bottom of the league. They both lost their opening 4 games of this year's Champions League campaign. Benfica climbing up 7 places in the standings with this win here. And look, Ajax remain absolutely and utterly rooted to the bottom. The entire club feels like it's in crisis. It was 2 really good goals, I thought. Dahl, thrashing one home really early on after a header was parried away. Richard Rios with the header and Vyacheslav Jaros, the ex-Liverpool third choice goalkeeper in goal for Ajax, parries it away. It falls to Dahl and he rifles it home. And then the second goal is really well worked. I mean, Ajax are pushing, obviously, for an equaliser in Amsterdam, but Edo kind of takes the ball down on the halfway line from a kind of looped long clearance, plays a 1-2 with Asnes, races in behind the Ajax back line and just fires it home. So a really good goal, and it felt like Benfica really needed a result, not just in terms of their Champions League hopes of progressing, but just in terms of getting everyone back on side after a really disappointing performance in the competition last time out. Ajax's best chances, a couple fell to David Klaassen, one really well saved, another complete miscue, and their pain just continues to grow. 4th successive defeat now in all competitions, and they're still with interim manager Fred Grimm. It's very much grim by name, grim by nature in terms of what Ajax are seeing at the moment. Surely they need to make an appointment sooner rather than later, because it really can't go on like this, to quote the meme. It's really not good enough.
September.
They are dreadful. And look, you know what? Farioli, not necessarily chased out. I think that would be really unfair to Ajax fans, but obviously the board were happy to terminate his contract. He's flying with Porto. And I think that what we're seeing is that he was kind of holding it all together at Ajax last year, even embarking on a title challenge. Things look very, very bleak in Amsterdam again at the moment. Quickly to Turkey, Galatasaray 0, Union Saint-Gilloise 1, and Gala's 3-match winning streak in the Champions League coming to an end at home. Promise David scored the only goal of this one. First time Galatasaray have lost a home game since August 2024.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't think many people would have put the money on it being Union Saint-Gilloise.
No.
But equally, considering they had 3 losses on a bounce in the Champions League before this one. But you look at it, and actually all 8 of the Galatasaray goals in the Champions League have come via 2 players, right? Victor Osimhen has 6 and Yunus Akgün has 2. Both of them were out injured here. And to be perfectly honest with you, so Galatasaray's hopes of scoring goals kind of went up in flames. They're close as they came. Gabriel Sara firing one from distance and seeing it cannon back off the crossbar. And at the other end, big old Ross Sykes, new cult hero of this podcast in many ways, hit the bar as well with a header from a corner. Only goal in the second half. Really well worked again. Florux with a cheeky little reverse pass into Zorgana, and he pulled it back for Promise David to just sort of side foot home from about 6 yards out. Gala piled on the pressure. There was a couple of close shaves. A late header cleared off the line by USG, and Gala had Arduño sent off very, very, very late on for a second booking. But you know what? I think you take it with a pinch of salt with Galatasaray, considering that the goal threats were off the pitch. They weren't dreadful, but they weren't great either. And they do look like they're really missing something when their big guns can't fire. But equally, I wouldn't be too concerned about their ability to qualify for at very least the playoffs. And I think that they will, in the second half of the season, still be a bit of a handful for teams to deal with. And USG are a good side in their own right? So it's not the end of the world for Gala, although I don't think you would have backed on this result before kickoff.
No, definitely wouldn't have looked at that before kickoff. I'm just trying to see where are Gala now, in 11th. Okay, so yeah, I mean it's slightly concerning because obviously you've still got all tomorrow, the Wednesday games to come. So once this all peters out, they'll probably be knocked down the standings a little bit. But ultimately, it's been a good start for them, and at least they've got the foundation to go and finish the job off.
Yeah, I mean, look, their top 8 hopes took a hit. I think that they'll be more than comfortable into the playoffs. So it's not the end of the world from a Gala perspective. And look, no one's going to want to go there over 2 legs, especially if they stay in that period that gets them the home leg second in those playoff rounds. So we'll see. The final game of the night was Slavia Prague 0, Athletic Club 0. And I wrote at halftime, first 45 lacked any real intensity or fluidity. Both teams defended.
You didn't watch the second half.
Chances were really limited on both sides of the ball. At full time, I wrote, the second 45 lacked any real intensity or fluidity. Both teams defended pretty well and chances were limited on both sides of the ball. Look,
must watch.
Had the bigger chances. Oyat Sunset in the first half, a good save from Stanek in the Slavia goal, although I think probably Sunset would have hoped he could have done better with it. Nico came on in the second half to try and turn this one in Athletic's favour, but nothing really sparked the fire in the rain in Prague. Couple of opportunities for Robert Navarro at the start of the second half. He should have probably put one of 3 separate opportunities that fell to him in sort of the first 10 minutes of the second 45. All 3 well saved, I would say, by Stanek, but not actually asking the keeper to pull out any sort of worldies. Really wasn't good enough for either team, I think, a point. A bit of a damp squib of a game for them to get it. And I think the big takeaway from this is that Athletic feel like a shadow of the team we saw last year at this point. It's a real shame for them and for Valverde, who seems like he might have squeezed out all of the juice that he can out of this group of players. And look, we know Athletic well. We've spent time with them. One of the kind of downsides, I suppose, to the model, and there are so many upsides in terms of community and the way that the entire club is based. One of the downsides of the model is that if you get a crop that isn't quite as talented as the one before, you can struggle to kind of squeeze the same results out of it. And especially this season where we've seen Iñaki Williams out, Nico Williams out, Oyhan Sunset out, and really struggling to regain that form that the 3 of them put together last year. It doesn't feel like there's loads of other options for them to look to actually create something out of nothing. And right now it feels like they're struggling to really get anything going. So might be one of those fallow years from an Athletic perspective. And it's just a real shame that it's come upon their return to the Champions League, because they would have hoped for so much better than this, considering how long they were out of the competition.
Yeah, totally. As we say there, it's unfortunate that they couldn't continue to shine, but they'll come back again, because it's a deep-rooted philosophy that means that they'll always be prepared for what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. With that, we're pretty much wrapped up on Champions League takeaway. That's all 9 of the games that took place on Tuesday. We will, of course, be back to look at all of Wednesday's action tomorrow. But for now, all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. Thank you so much for listening as ever. And we will see you tomorrow for another set of 9 games that we'll be breaking down on the podcast. Take care, Ranks Squad. Peace.